You know all there is to know about fighting, so there's no sense us going down that same old road again. To beat this guy, you need speed. You don't have it. And your knees can't take the pounding, so hard running is out. And you got arthritis in your neck, and you've got calcium deposits on most of your joints, so sparring is out. So what we'll be calling on is good old-fashioned blunt force trauma, horsepower, heavy-duty cast iron, pile-driving punches that will have to hurt so much they'll rattle his ancestors. Every time you hit him with his shot, it's gotta feel like he tried kissing the express train. Yeah, let's start building some hurting bombs.
Bundy here. You there. The 2025 Fantasy Championship is here between the 10-4 Pork Chop Express versus the 11-2-1 defending champion Super Shredder. Number 1 versus number 2. Here's what's interesting about this game. On one side, you've got a manager who has everything to gain this week. Pork Chop Express needs this victory to solidify his fantasy career, to solidify what he has done in this league. We're not talking about this league. We're not talking about cop leagues. We're not talking about whatever the fuck you guys do. We're talking about our league here. A league which Paul has consistently won and been one of the top teams as far as output. But he's had some difficulties when it comes to finishing, when it comes to killing what he catches. A victory for Paul this week means his greatest fantasy win. Defeating Andy in 2016, before Andy was Andy, didn't mean that much back then. Your championship has to mean something when you do it. We can't retroactively go back in time and give you credit before your opponent does what they eventually do. That's not how it works. He lost in 2020, and now he's here in 2025 to stop the commission's two-peat, to stop his reign at 3 championships, limiting him from winning 4, would be the greatest victory for Paul and would solidify his spot amongst the top of this league historically. For the commish, it would mean being at the very top of this league historically, having the most victories, and now being tied with Andy for the top spot with championships, ending Andy's reign at the top. You notice how Team Bundy was at the top from 2017 to 2023, and now Andy was just at the top for 2 years. That's huge. That's big. So the commish will be the best fantasy football team in this league if he gets a victory. And Paul will insert himself into that conversation. It's debatable. Paul perhaps can start a conversation about having less championships than other teams, but possibly being more valuable in terms of the quality of win. And this would be a hell of a quality win right here. So let's go on to the matchups. Starting off with Super Shredder. Now, he is in the unfortunate position to have a few of his key players in tough matchups. Jonathan Taylor versus the second-ranked team versus running backs in the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Jonathan Taylor, as I told you last week, is no longer that player who he was in weeks 1 through 10 before their week 11 bye. scoring 27 points in week 2, 29, 28, 19, 30, 35. Just ridiculous output from Jonathan Taylor is no longer a realistic expectation for the commish, as Daniel Jones has gone down. Not sure what's happened to their offensive line, if they've had injuries. I'm not that tapped in, but he scored 13 points in round 2, and that's pretty much what you can expect from Jonathan Taylor. You can expect a floor of maybe 10 points, and maybe he can get the commish something in the late teens, about 19 points, something in that area, but he is no longer that home run running back. Josh Jacobs here on the injury report, he's questionable to start, but the commish does have Emmanuel Wilson on his bench. It's interesting here because if Josh Jacobs doesn't play, does the commish just put Bucky Irving in that second running back slot and instead start Kyle Pitts on Monday night? There was a pickup made by the commish, picking up Harold Fannin Jr. just this week. What will the commish do if Josh Jacobs doesn't start? I understand that Josh Jacobs has been injured this whole season, but is still putting up great numbers. Just 2 points last week versus a tough matchup. Is he going to give you a 2? Probably not if he plays, but you're not expecting him to have the greatest game. But with Josh Jacobs, he could get in there for a goal line touchdown. And the number 3 ranked George Pickens. I didn't even realize George Pickens was so high in the wide receiver rankings. 19 points last week, now going here just in a couple of hours here on Thursday, Christmas Day, versus the Washington Commanders in a very, very favorable matchup. If the commish wants to be taken seriously this week, George Pickens has got a ball, and balling for George Pickens could mean 14 points. That could be all he needs. He doesn't necessarily need him to get into the 20s. The greatest part about the commission's lineup here is the story of the 2025 playoffs, along with Kyle Pitts. The story of the 2025 playoffs here. Courtland Sutton, who was initially dropped by Andy for some odd, stupid fucking reason, and then for another retarded reason, dropped by Pedro just about a week ago or so. 17 points week 15, 14 points week 14. We can only imagine in some other dimension, in other fantasy leagues, Courtland Sutton has been the saving grace for fantasy teams. The commish getting a favorable, a nice-sized victory last week, so he didn't necessarily get him the victory, but he certainly helped. Jackson Smith-Njigba here versus the Carolina Panthers. He is your number 1 wide receiver. You already know what he's going to do. And let's have another conversation about Bucky Irving here, who is not the goal line back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and hasn't gotten a 100-yard game. Maybe he's gotten one in total in terms of passing yards combined with rushing yards. But Bucky Irving just looks a step behind who he was last season. Perhaps he's still a bit injured. That's probably why he's not the goal line back. They got Sean Tucker going in there. So the commish is at a disadvantage here, and let's see how this plays out. Can Bucky Irving finally put in a Bucky Irving performance for the commish? Can that trade finally benefit him? Because when he came back in week 13 and he got 14 and 13, the commission didn't really need Bucky Irving. But this week, he needs Bucky Irving to do more than 7 points. He absolutely needs that. Here's another aspect of his team that hasn't been performing. And I think this is good news for you. I mean, when you can be 11-2-1, and you can have the season that he's had, and you can look at a few slots in his squad that haven't been performing, I think that's a good thing, because you'll assume that they're due to score some points. The New England Patriots, since their week 14 bye, since the playoffs have started, have gotten a -2. Did the Gamish have them in? Oh, I don't want to. Not on this fucking website. I don't want to go back. If I was on the application, I would go back. -2 in week. Well, the Gamish had a bye, so yeah. In week 15, and just 6 points last week versus the Baltimore Ravens, now going against the New York Jets. So you've got to imagine that the Patriots can add about 6 to 7 more points to the Commission's total on top of what they did. Hopefully for him, they can get him a double-digit output here. And Brandon Aubrey, just 5 points last week. So the commish has players that are due to score points for him, and I think that's going to help him in a week where he's got some pretty bad matchups. I mean, he has Drake May against the Jets as well, the 25th ranked team versus quarterbacks, but the matchups are looking anemic. And as far as his bench, there is no longer the possibility of starting Emeka Egbuka, who has been permanently benched for the rest of the season. Is Emeka Egbuka gonna be that player? Is he gonna be the guy to get 18 points on the bench and the commish loses by 7? You know, mathematically, if it gets him a loss, that's what's at stake here. Bench players live in infamy. We can't look at Tank Bigsby. We can't look at Blake Corum, who can score a red zone touchdown on Monday night, but we can look at players like Egbuka and maybe Kyle Pitts, who also plays on Monday night and last week got 12 points. How can you trust Kyle Pitts? Well, you might have to if Josh Jacobs doesn't suit up. And that's about it for the Commission's team. Moving on to Pork Chop Express, Saquon Barkley finally has arrived here for the playoffs, and that's all you can ask for, I guess. All you can ask for is if my star player doesn't necessarily have the best season, hopefully I have other parts of my squad that can keep me afloat. But if my star player can turn it on week 15, where Paul was on a bye, so check this out. Week 14, he got an 18. Week 15, he got a 14. And just last week versus the Commanders, he was able to put together 21 points. So maybe here versus the Buffalo Bills, who are the 27th ranked team versus running backs, we saw what TreVeyon Henderson did to the Buffalo Bills. It's very possible that Saquon Barkley could have another big game here for Paul. Or did Saquon Barkley blow his load? Did he blow his load? I don't believe in that. I know, Paul. I get it. I do not believe in that, and I never will. I'm sorry. No one brings up blowing your load in the middle of the season. Nobody ever says that. The commish, for example, before Paul ended his undefeated streak in week 8, the commish was putting up 119 in week 2, 126, 121, 113, 150, 141. And then he lost 88 to 120 to Paul. Did he blow his load? I don't believe in that. No one ever brings it up at the beginning of the season. No one ever brings it up. You only talk about blowing your load at the end of the season, and then we look at, oh my god, he scored 120, and then oh my god, he scored 80, then yes, blowing your load, man. No, it doesn't matter. It implies that all your players, this is why it's flawed, because it implies that all your players are working symbiotically, if that's the right word. If they're working all in conjunction with one another, all these players, and they all move as a unit, and we all blow our load or we score. But I don't believe it. It's a bunch of shit. It is a bunch of shit. Speaking of blowing, what would be poetic? Because I'm not here to talk about who I want to win. We all know who I would prefer to get the victory. I would prefer that Paul gets the victory. But how poetic would it be if Puka Nacua shows up and he gets 2 points against the Atlanta Falcons? If he gets injured and he's out of the game, we all know Puka comes back in the game. But he's gotten 28 points, 18 points, and 34 points just last week. What if he blows his load? Wouldn't that be awesome? The guy that's fucking preaching it matters, blowing your load matters. I don't give a shit. Okay? It also implies that no teams ever I just showed you a team putting together 120, 114. It implies that nobody does it. Look at the scores. Plenty of us have scored, not Team Bundy this year, but plenty of teams have scored consecutive 100-point performances. And also the era that we're in where we have another flex position that we've added. Now you can start a running back and a wide receiver instead of a tight end. That matters. That matters. The potential to score points matters. So maybe you could say blow your load when we were forced to put in a fucking idiot like Kyle Pitts, but you don't have to do that. So I don't believe in it. You're never going to convince me otherwise. And maybe that's not on the table here because these two teams didn't have what we would consider monster games, right? Paul scoring 114 last week and the commish scoring 101. So I guess the discussion of blowing your load is off the table here. I want to consider Paul blowing his load, getting 72 points. But no, okay, let's get back to the matchup. So Omarion Hampton here on Saturday at 4:30 versus the Houston Texans. Difficult game. Has Omarion Hampton looked like a world beater? Has he looked like the player that some of us think he's going to be? He hasn't yet, and maybe the offense isn't necessarily centered around the run. I think at the beginning of the season, everybody was like, oh, Jim Harbaugh offenses, constantly run the ball, but Justin Herbert just keeps slinging the ball. So he's getting his carries somewhere in the teens, and 16 carries last week with 85 yards and a touchdown. So perhaps he can put together a decent game, but Paul's also got the Texans, who are the second-ranked defense. Now, of course he has to start the Texans. The Texans. This is reminiscent to Paul's infamous season where he had the New England Patriots and they were scoring like 20 points a game. This team has only 4 single-digit weeks, and every other week is a 10, a 14, an 18, 15 points last week. They score points against bad teams. That's what you want your defense to do. You want your defense to pounce on those terrible teams, those opportunities to score double-digit points, and that's what the Texans have done. But he's got the Texans. I think that matters. I think in a regular week, it doesn't necessarily matter when you have a player going against your defense. But what if this is Omarion Hampton's breakout game? Breakout game for Omarion Hampton would mean so 21 is his that's his high versus the Giants. Who knows? But some form of significance there, I think, with the number 1 running back going against his defense. Jakobi Meyers, who hasn't had great games since the beginning of the playoffs, only scoring double digits a couple of weeks before. So Jakobi Meyers is a player who you hope that he can contribute 7, 8, 12 points. He adds on the top. You're not expecting him to get 20 points. Unless, of course, it happens versus the 27th ranked team versus wide receivers in the Colts, who are just falling apart. And Paul also made a pickup here with Dylan Sampson, with the prospect of Quinyon Judkins not playing. Javonte Williams, I said before, was Paul's most consistent running back. Can Javonte Williams later today, can he go out there and score more than the 3 points that he put up last week? I think so. Can Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua on a Monday night? I listened to the commish discussing, because obviously he's going to have to be up. He said he'd be comfortable with a 50 point. I love how he just throws out this like huge number. Oh, by 50. What's more than likely, if he's up at all, is the commish would probably be up by like 15 points or something like that. Here's what I think. Here's what I think. I believe that the matchups are so skewed towards Paul's favor that it tips the competitive scale. I think the Commish is the better team. But I also believe that Pork Chop Express is B1. If the Commish is A1, Pork Chop Express is B1. And in a week where matchups are favorable towards the B1 team, I'm going to give that B1 the edge. Yes. Oh, yes. I believe that later this week, Pork Chop Express will get his second fantasy championship. Not because of the Matthew Stafford and the Puka Nacua. I mean, that's a huge part of it. I'm looking at the Commish's team. I'm looking at the Commish's matchups. Drake May, huge game versus the New York Jets. He's just got questions. He's got Josh Jacobs. He's got Bucky Irving. Does Bucky Irving necessarily answer the call if he gets 10 points? If he gets 11 points? Yeah, if Njigba gets 30 versus the Carolina Panthers, and it's like, but does Bucky Irving answer that call with just 10 points? I don't know. Can he break out a 40-yard touchdown? I don't know. Here's what I can tell you, just looking at the data, just looking at what's in front of me. The big opportunity is today with George Pickens. And yes, with Brandon Aubrey as well. If Brandon Aubrey goes out there and doesn't drill at least 3 field goals, getting just 5 points last week, the Commish needs Brandon Aubrey to show up. He needs game script to work out in a way where Brandon Aubrey gets opportunities. But I don't believe that the Commish will pull it off this week. Look, Christian Watson for Paul. Are you absolutely excited if you're Paul for Christian Watson versus the Baltimore Ravens? Can you see a situation where Christian Watson gets a 40-yard bomb and then later on in the game he gets popped and then he's on the ground for like 20 minutes and he's out of the game? It's very possible. He's a very fragile player, so you're not excited for that if you're Paul. But I think he's going to pull off the victory. I think he's going to do it. And it hurts me to say it. I've got ops all over this league. I told Paul that he wasn't going to make it past the second round. But here he is. Here he is with great matchups. And just because it's a great matchup, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to score a bunch of points. It can be deceiving. Some teams get better. And the statistics just remain what they are. But I think Saquon's going to eat. I think Javonte Williams is going to do a lot better than he did last week. I can't speak for Puka Nacua. I can't speak for Matthew Stafford. But we can only assume that even with a bad game, they would total 30 points, 30 some odd points. I mean, that's their floor, really. And for the Commish, they're his running backs, who all 3 of them are a concern to perform less than what they're expected. 15 projected for Jonathan Taylor, 13 for Josh Jacobs, and 11 for Bucky Irving. That's what I see. I see the Commish not getting what he would normally expect out of his running backs, needing his wide receivers to desperately have big games. Courtland Sutton and George Pickens playing today on Thursday. But as I said, give me Pork Chop Express. I'm not going to talk about scores. I'm just going to tell you that Pork Chop Express will be the victor in the 2025 Fantasy Championship. I said what I said. Go fuck yourself.